Welcome back to Brand Vanguard, the channel where we uncover the stories of visionaries who built world-renowned empires from nothing. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life of one of the most influential men in the history of the automobile industry, Henry Ford. You've all heard of Ford Motors, but how many of you know the true story of a poor farm boy who revolutionized not just transportation, but the very way we live and work? This is the incredible story of how Henry Ford went from a rural farm in Michigan to creating one of the most iconic brands in the world. Stick with us, because what you're about to hear is not just a tale of innovation and success, but a journey filled with failures, persistence, and a vision that changed the world forever. Part 1. Humble beginnings. Henry Ford was born in 1863 on a farm in Greenfield Township, Michigan, during a time when America was still an agricultural society. His parents were immigrants from Ireland, living a modest life as farmers. For young Henry, farm life was hard, and he wasn't particularly interested in farming. However, one thing that caught his fascination was machinery. At the age of 12, Henry encountered his first piece of mechanical innovation, a steam engine. While most boys his age were learning how to plow fields, Henry was curious about how things worked. He spent hours disassembling and reassembling watches, clocks, and even farm tools, showing an early talent for engineering. It was this curiosity that set the foundation for his future. But life on the farm wasn't easy, and like many boys of his time, Henry was expected to follow in his father's footsteps. He knew that if he stayed, he would spend his life toiling away. So at the age of 16, Henry made a bold decision to leave the farm and seek work in Detroit. Part 2. The spark of inspiration. Detroit was a bustling industrial city, and it was here that Henry found work as a machinist apprentice. He learned about steam engines, mechanical devices, and industrial machinery. But it was the advent of the internal combustion engine that would change everything for him. In 1891, Henry got a job as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, a role that would bring him closer to one of the greatest inventors of all time, Thomas Edison. Working at Edison was a pivotal point for Ford. He had a steady job, a wife, and children, but his nights were spent obsessing over the idea of creating a horseless carriage. At this point, cars were nothing but toys for the wealthy, handcrafted and slow. But Henry Ford saw a bigger picture. He dreamed of creating affordable, reliable vehicles that could change the way people lived. In his small, cramped workshop, he began working on his first prototype, the quadricycle. Part 3. The quadricycle and early failures. In 1896, after many long nights and endless tinkering, Ford built his first gasoline-powered car, the quadricycle. It was a simple machine, powered by a two-cylinder engine with bicycle wheels. But it worked. When he fired up the engine and drove it down the streets of Detroit, people were amazed. For the first time, the dream of an accessible car seemed real. But Ford's first attempt at business was far from a success. He was eager to start mass-producing vehicles. So in 1901, he founded the Detroit Automobile Company. However, the company quickly failed. His cars were too expensive and unreliable, and Ford learned that rushing into the business without perfecting his product would lead to disaster. For most people, this failure would have been enough to quit, but not for Henry Ford. Instead, he saw it as a learning experience. He now knew that in order to succeed, he would need a more efficient way to build cars and, more importantly, a better design. So, Ford went back to the drawing board and focused on creating a car that would change everything. The Model T. Part 5. A visionary leader. The $5 workday. One of the lesser-known, but equally important innovations Ford introduced was the $5 workday. In 1914, Ford shocked the business world by doubling the wages of his workers to $5 per day. This was unprecedented at a time when the average factory worker earned less than half of that. Ford believed that well-paid workers were happier, more productive, and crucially able to afford the very cars they were building. This bold move was both a humanitarian gesture and a strategic business decision. It reduced turnover, increased loyalty, and ultimately contributed to the success of the company. But the $5 workday wasn't just about cars. It was about changing the relationship between workers and employers. It set a new standard for wages across industries and sparked conversations about workers' rights and corporate responsibility. Part 6. Ford's Global Ambitions and Challenges. As Ford Motors became one of the most powerful companies in America, Henry Ford began to set his sights on global expansion. He established factories in Europe and Latin America, aiming to bring his affordable cars to people all around the world. However, with global success came challenges. Ford was notoriously controlling, and his refusal to listen to advisors or adapt to market changes led to friction within the company. By the mid-1930s, Ford's dominance was being challenged by General Motors, which was offering more stylish and varied cars. While Ford stuck to his one-model strategy, GM's flexibility allowed it to overtake Ford in sales. Ford's resistance to change, combined with his controversial views, including his infamous anti-Semitic writings, stained his legacy. Although Ford eventually stepped back from day-to-day operations, his influence remained. The company had to evolve under his son, Edsel Ford, to compete in the rapidly changing automobile market. Part 7. The Legacy of Henry Ford. Despite his personal flaws and business challenges, Henry Ford's legacy remains undeniable. He is credited with transforming the automobile from a luxury item into a mass-market product that changed the world. The assembly line, the affordable car, and the $5 workday, all testaments to Ford's vision and determination. More than just a car manufacturer, Henry Ford was a visionary who saw the potential for technology to democratize society. His innovations not only transformed industry, but also created a new era of mobility, allowing millions to access new opportunities. By the time of his death in 1947, Ford had become a legend, a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. Part 8. The Ford model of the company's comeback. By the late 1920s, it became clear that the Model T's time had passed. The market demanded more stylish, faster, and modern vehicles. After stubbornly resisting change for years, Henry Ford finally decided to replace the aging Model T with a completely new design, the Ford Model A. In 1927, the Model A was introduced to the public. This vehicle was more modern, comfortable, and visually appealing. It was a critical move that allowed Ford Motors to regain its position in the market. The introduction of the Model A signified not only Ford's ability to evolve, but also a new era for the company. However, the process of transitioning to the Model A came with a cost. Ford had to shut down his factories for 6 months to retool, which caused financial strain. But in the end, the gamble paid off, and the Model A became a commercial success, keeping Ford competitive in the ever-evolving automobile industry. Part 9. Ford's Vision for Society. The Fordlandia Experiment. Henry Ford's vision didn't stop at revolutionizing the automobile industry. In the late 1920s, he embarked on an ambitious project in the Amazon rainforest. Ford wanted to create a self-sustaining rubber plantation in an idealistic, utopian American-style town in the heart of Brazil, which he called Fordlandia. His goal was to secure a steady supply of rubber for his car tires and to provide a model of efficient, modern living for the local population. However, this grand vision quickly turned into a disaster. The local Brazilian climate and soil were unsuitable for rubber production, and the workers were not accustomed to Ford's rigid, Americanized rules and routines. Fordlandia became a symbol of Ford's overreach and misunderstanding of local cultures. By the early 1940s, the project had failed spectacularly. Fordlandia was abandoned, and it remains one of the more bizarre chapters in Ford's legacy, a testament to his ambition, but also to his limitations in understanding the complexities of global ventures. Part 10. The Rise of General Motors and the Shift in the Auto Industry. As Ford was focused on global expansion and the internal workings of his company, a new competitor was on the rise: General Motors GM. While Ford clung to the idea of one car model for all, GM diversified its offerings, providing multiple models at various price points and embraced a marketing strategy that appealed to the American desire for choice and style. Under the leadership of Alfred Sloan, GM surpassed Ford in the 1930s by offering customers the ability to move up through different car models as they gained wealth. This flexibility gave GM a distinct advantage. Ford, with his one-model focus, was left behind. While the Model had succeeded in the short term, GM's business model was better suited to the evolving tastes of the American consumer. Ford's reluctance to modernize quickly enough meant that by the 1930s, GM had overtaken Ford as the leading car manufacturer in the United States. This shift marked a significant moment in the history of the automobile industry, as the once unshakable Ford empire began to show signs of cracking. Part 11. Henry Ford and the labor strikes. Despite Ford's progressive move with the $5 workday, his relationship with labor unions was notoriously difficult. As the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, tensions between Ford and his workers grew. In 1937, Ford's River Rouge plant in Michigan became the site of a violent clash known as the Battle of the Overpass. Union organizers from the United Auto Workers, UAW, were trying to distribute leaflets outside the plant when they were beaten by Ford's private security, which was led by Harry Bennett, a tough enforcer hired by Ford to keep the unions out. Photos of the event were published nationwide, leading to public outrage and damaging Ford's reputation. Eventually, Ford had to make concessions. In 1941, he was forced to recognize the UAW and allow unionization in his factories. This was a major turning point in American labor history and showed the growing power of unions in shaping the industrial landscape. Part 12. The role of Ford Motors in World War II. When World War II broke out, Henry Ford was initially resistant to engage in military production. Despite his personal anti-war stance, Ford's company became an essential part of the war effort after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Ford Motor Company was responsible for producing planes, tanks, and military vehicles at an unprecedented rate. Part 13. Henry Ford's later years and legacy of innovation. As Ford aged, his grip on the company tightened, but his ability to lead effectively began to weaken. His son, Edsel Ford, had been managing the day-to-day operations of the company for many years, but Henry often undermined his decisions. Edsel, who had a more modern and progressive approach to leadership, struggled with his father's resistance to change. Tragically, Edsel died in 1943, leaving Henry devastated. This loss forced Ford, then in his 80s, to temporarily take control of the company once again, despite his failing health. Eventually, Ford's grandson, Henry Ford II, would take over the company, leading it through a much-needed period of modernization. Despite his declining influence in his later years, Henry Ford's impact on the world was undeniable. His innovations in the manufacturing process, his vision of affordable cars, and his leadership during the early 20th century helped shape the modern industrial world. Part 14. Ford's impact on American culture and society. Ford's contributions extended beyond the automobile industry. He fundamentally shaped American society. The assembly line not only revolutionized production, but also altered the way Americans worked. Ford's $5 workday helped create a middle class that could afford the very products they were building, thus driving consumerism and the growth of the American economy. Moreover, the introduction of the automobile transformed America's landscape. Suburbs grew as people could now commute from farther away. Highways were built, and car culture became a defining aspect of American life in the 20th century. Ford's dream of making cars accessible to all wasn't just about transportation, it was about creating a new way of life. The Ford Foundation and Ford's lasting legacy. Henry Ford's contributions continued even after his death through the Ford Foundation, which was established in 1936 with the mission of advancing human welfare. After his passing in 1947, the foundation became one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world, funding programs in education, public health, and scientific research. Ford's legacy lives on not only in the continued success of the Ford Motor Company, but also in his influence on business practices, labor relations, and industrial production. His vision of affordable cars and efficient manufacturing forever changed the economic landscape of America and the world. Henry Ford's life is a testament to the power of innovation, perseverance, and vision. From a poor farm boy in Michigan to one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, Ford's journey is a remarkable story of overcoming odds and creating a legacy that endures to this day. And that brings us to the end of the incredible journey of Henry Ford. His life was full of triumphs, challenges, and groundbreaking innovations that shaped not only the automobile industry, but the entire modern world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Henry Ford story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss any of our future videos where we explore the stories behind the world's most iconic brands. This is Brand Vanguard, where history meets innovation.